morning. This is Barb Rawson with Kirkwood Corporate Training, and I am here today with Celina Peerman. Celina and I have had the pleasure to work together and through all of the ins and outs of a HyFlex Classroom for probably, a good 6 months now, Celina, wouldn't you say?
I think so. Well, I think as we both look at this COVID pandemic in the years to come, we'll remember all the hours we spent trying to figure this out.
Absolutely. So we've got a few tips and tricks and helpful hints that we would love to share with you today. There's some knowledge that we have gained. We learned along the way. And so I'm just going to jump right in, Celina.
Sounds good.
So, one of the things when starting a HyFlex class, you have students that are joining at different times, those walking in the classroom. And I'm just wondering, how do you manage all of that while maintaining engagement?
So I think about a couple of things, right? Is that as instructors, it's our role to figure out how to help people learn. And people can't learn when they're anxious. People can't learn new content if they're fumbling around with technology. So I think for instructors, it's really taken everything we knew about adult learners and cranked up the volume a bit. It put some pressure on us. So as instructors, I want us to prepare ahead of time. I have never been more prepared ahead of time than I have this past year, because you can't just wing it the same way. And while we get a little more comfortable with the technology and we might be winging it a little bit more, I regret it every time. So there's just maybe a little piece of advice from me. So if you think about helping them get settled in, they need to be feeling welcomed in. So we're used to doing that in the classroom, but now you got the online piece of that too. So I really want us to greet them by name. So if you're greeting people in the classroom, you need to do the same thing with people online. And it's hard. I recognize this is taking way new parts of energy from us that we didn't have to do for in-class room people in the same way. We did. It was just different. The expectations were different. But because Zoom does, whatever platform you're using, when you've got students online live, they need to be drawn into. So using their name, welcoming them, a little bit of chit chat. Recognize also that in a lot of the platforms, you may put a welcome message in the chat, but if you're not logged on prior to that message being posted, they're not going to see it. So I've had to learn to put several messages in there based on when people are logging in. And I need to think about what's best for the Zoom people or the online folks. That do they need to hear the chatter in the room and that helps them? Sometimes that's okay. Sometimes that needs to be muted for a while so that I mute and I unmute as I welcome them in, because sometimes that background classroom noise can be also overwhelming. And if they're trying to get settled in and, take care of the dog or coworkers or what's ever going on in their environment, we want to make that as easy as possible. So I think about that welcoming piece, how we get them in so that they've got the materials. I still run into some examples, and I've really had to think about if we produce handouts or materials for in-classroom people, did the online people get it? Do they have access to it? Did they lose it, right? Can I put the file in the chat room? Just being really aware that we've got to serve both audiences, and they're both going to need something a little bit different from us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Celina. You do a really nice job also managing that chat throughout the course of the class. Like if there's, instructions given, or maybe some quiet time they're supposed to be reflecting. You do a really nice job kind of restating that in the chat. And I think I've had students comment that they really appreciate that. Because sometimes when you're in the virtual world, it's a little harder to maybe stay fully focused. So I think that's a great tip that you do.
Thank you. And I really try to think about it, again, from those adult learning strategies, that if whoever the trainer instructor is, if they've got a PowerPoint up, right, we've got to help our participants choose their view so that it's best for them. So maybe they're seeing the PowerPoint and the camera speaker. But at the same time, we get into that zone, and whatever they've got going on in the background, they're trying to manage that and to keep them here engaged learning. So I want us to change up the viewpoint. So if I'm doing a PowerPoint and I take it down, it is now just focused on what's ever on camera. And that changes it up for them. And then when you reinforce it in the chat, right? Not only they're hearing it, they're seeing me, but now they're reading something in the chat. So I'll put a keyword, a key idea. At breaks, I'll pose a question, because somehow to keep them involved. And we've certainly seen that folks who may have been hesitant in the classroom to participate because of just their learning and personality style are finding new things in chat of a way to engage them. And honestly, I think the hybrid's around for a long time, but when people come back to the classroom, I think it's going to change it again for us as instructors, that group who had the chat feature will no longer have it in the classroom. And I think there's a group there that's going to miss that. And I think it's going to cause us as instructors to figure out how do we engage them even differently than when they're back, if they're back on site.
That's a great perspective. I'm also curious. So, you know, within our HyFlex classrooms, sometimes the camera for the Zoom folks is not always ideally located. It might be mounted up on a wall, might be on the ceiling. So you're trying to maintain eye contact with those in the classroom, but yet also give a little eye contact time to those virtually. What advice do you have when dealing with that?
Hard, right? We didn't know that prior to this kind of whole last year that we had to learn that a camera had to be a person, right? That we have to focus there. I was recently coaching with a company president who kept showing up on his calls like this, and this was not good, right? And so I say that with a little bit of humor for all of us, because of course we recognize that. But as instructors, if we want people engaged, if we want them to be learning content, we've got to figure out how to complete, and I'm going to say faking it, but of course there's people on the other side of that camera. So you got to love that camera just like you love your students. And it's hard because if we're really making contact in the room and then I come back to the camera, wherever it's located, right? I've got to just own that camera. And I want us to own the space and the presence. I probably have figured out that I really am picky on camera angles because I don't want someone looking at the back side of my head the whole time, and really being aware of that. I think it's so important because it's easy to give our attention to the students in the classroom. We're used to it. We're wired for it. They're right there. And it's changing us to really think about how do we show that we care about the online participants. And that's so important if they're going to be engaged, if they're going to learn, and if we're really doing our job as educators.
Yeah, that is so true, Celina. And for those of you listening today, Celina is semi-acrobat in the classroom sometimes, and that to get that perfect camera angle, so we've got the cameras mounted in the ceiling, but she is known to be logged onto her laptop, and if there's another instructor, be chasing them around, trying to get the best camera angle or trying to get the best camera angle for activities going on so that our online students can really see what's going on. So we appreciate your extra efforts on that.
You know, it is, if this is the environment we've got, right? None of us saw this coming, but what a neat opportunity. Let's leverage the heck out of this to really bring learning in organizations, in our training rooms, in our classrooms to a whole new level. I think we wouldn't have asked for it, but let's take advantage of it. You know, you raised that point about engaging them. And one of the other techniques that I think you and I've worked very hard on is never trying to surprise our online participants, because again, they've just got different stuff going on. I don't want to surprise my in-classroom people either. But for example, one of the techniques that I learned and I've used for now some time is when you say their name first before a question, it gives them time to adjust and think of their answer. So if I said, Barb, one of the key points that was brought up this morning was XYZ about whatever we're working on. Do you have an example you could add back to our discussion? Now, Barb was already on cue because I said her name first. And then I extended my question a little longer just to give her time to. And I think that's a really important part to not surprising people, giving them the opportunity best. Because if I said, so I really want to look at an example of what we've talked about tonight and how it's showing up for you, Barb, what do you think? And Barb's like, right. And even better yet, if I've got my laptop in front of me, even though there might be other classroom cameras, I can type that right into the chat and say, here's the upcoming question. I'm going to be looking for 2 or 3. I have to be way more particular about what I'm going to do with a question or an activity in this HyFlex environment. So I might drop it into the chat and say, I'm looking for 2 people. And that cues up my online folks. And I say it in the classroom so that people can give their best answer. And I think that's really changed the way I think about engaging students and helping them participate in this better.
Great. Yeah. And that is a wonderful example, because when you say their name first, it increases their awareness and gives them the opportunity to really think about an answer that they want to share. I'm curious too, just in kind of maximizing that engagement in terms of breaks. So in a HyFlex classroom, how do you manage breaks?
I think we're finding overall people need more stretch breaks. They can be short. It can be a 5-minute stretch. And if so we try to do things like every hour, it's a 5-minute stretch with maybe a longer one somewhere in the middle. If you've got a 4-hour session, maybe your one halfway through is 10 or 15 minutes. We're just seeing more and more that 5 minutes every hour makes a difference. People get up, they refocus. We always encourage them to hydrate and move on a break and then come back, and they're going to be more engaged. There's some neat ways to do that. So I know you and I've always tried to put the time in the chat room, because it's easy online to go, I don't know what time we were supposed to be back, and the clocks kind of morph and you're not quite sure what time. The other technique that I have used, and I've not been as diligent about it, but I love it every time I do it, is that I put up a PowerPoint that is timed for a 5-minute break. So I've got an animal one, for example. So every minute a new animal appears on the screen and says 4 minutes left, 3 minutes left, 2 minutes left. And so that timer runs during that break. I know we've done it with Google Timer, and then you have to remember to turn off the timer. Otherwise the alarm, wakes up everybody. So I think we've all kind of learned which, you have to pick which one's going to work for the group, right? Putting funny animals up in some programs may not be appropriate, but it's a way to get them to stretch, regroup, and come back ready to learn. And I think that's been really important. There is such a thing now that we're calling Zoom fatigue. People are just tired in a different way. So if you have your in-class people and if your online people, it's finding that best balance for both. And you can't cover the same amount of content. I would really challenge any instructor you can't just take what you delivered full-time in the classroom to a HyFlex environment. I really encourage you to go back through it, really have a hard conversation with yourself about how much content can you truly cover. And Barb, you've known me now for a long time, that one of my pet peeves, makes my hair stand on end and my hair catch on fire, is that when there's a speaker up front going, well, I don't have time to show you that. I don't have time to show you that. Nope, we're going to skip these. And as instructors, we need that flexibility. Absolutely. Are there things I've skipped, but my audience doesn't need to know. And I think that just helps give a signal to our students that given this dynamic of environment, everybody's important, and we want everybody to learn the most they can do. And as instructors, it's really on us from a design standpoint to really select the right amount of content. You and I have been working on a model where there's some sort of activity every hour to shake them up. And we've known that from an adult learning standpoint, every 20 minutes. So every time I design a training, it's in 20-minute increments. And I think that has now become very true for the HyFlex environment. I may be delivering for 4 hours, but I have it in 20-minute chunks. And I think that's really important for us, from breaks, from content, and how we really get and support people's learning.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Celina. We are so grateful to you for sharing your pearls of wisdom today. And we wish everyone the best of luck with their HyFlex Classroom.
Keep at it, folks. We'll figure this out together. Thanks, Barb.
All right, good morning. I am here today with Helena Long, one of our amazing instructors who has worked with us through this HyFlex modality of training. So thank you, Helena, for being here. Helena's really embraced the tools that are important in engaging students in a HyFlex classroom. So Helena, can you talk a little bit about some of the tools that you use to engage your online and your in-person students?
Yes, and thank you for inviting me to work with you on this. I'd be glad to share tips and lessons learned, especially over this last year, as we have all been learning how to how to train in this HyFlex environment. So in terms of the tools, I just use the basic Zoom tools. Really, I use the chat, I use polls, the breakout rooms, the icons for raising hands, or and then the whiteboard. And I keep it really simple. And the reason that I do that intentionally is because I found that in my classes, I have a variety of folks, from those that are very tech savvy to those that may not be. And so I want to use the tools that will enable or facilitate or support the learning, rather than trying to use some more advanced tools that might be a distraction. So I keep the tools pretty simple, actually. I also use a lot of videos. And so although that's not a Zoom feature per se, there's some special settings that you want to use in Zoom so the videos can be effective. And I found that the videos are effective too. So
excellent. Thank you, Helena. So how, by using these tools, how do you feel that that really helps to engage the in-person and the virtual students?
I like to start my sessions right away using the tools. I like to start high energy and getting people engaged immediately. So I will often even start with a poll or a question so that people chat their answers in, or they respond to the poll, and the folks in the classroom can raise their hands or can answer. And then once you get that engagement and you get those responses, then I can use that to jump into the topic and talk about what they already know, what they want to learn, questions they have. So I start that way really often. And then during the session, using exercises, assessments, I use reflection questions, I use action planning. And then as I let the learners think about those individually, then I use the breakout rooms. And I put them in pairs or in small groups. And I really like the breakout rooms. I get a lot of feedback that the learners enjoy those the most. And also they get to do some great networking that way. So I use the breakout rooms so they can discuss how they're applying and what they're learning as they go through the class. As I go through the exercises and we get the debriefs from the breakout rooms, then for at least one of those, we capture the responses on the whiteboard. And so then throughout the session, I can refer back to the whiteboard. And that becomes a good anchor for us in terms of what we covered, and at the end, a good way to summarize. So I like the whiteboard. I encourage the learners who are online to continue to use the chat and the icons throughout the session. And so that way they can continue to participate. A key element, which isn't really a Zoom tool, but a key element, I think, for success is having a producer. The producer is so key to this because that person can monitor the online learners while I am monitoring the in-class learners. And we can work like just a really strong team to make sure that both in class and online can feel like a unified group. And so the producer can be watching the chat and the questions and the icons and can interject that. So that is also a big help. And then I mentioned using the polls or the chats as part of the learning experience, but I also use those for icebreakers. So for example, I found this list of food that originated in Iowa. So I will make a poll out of that. And when they come back from break or come back from lunch, I'll start with that poll and say, so how many of you have eaten these foods? And then we have a fun little discussion before we get back into the topic. So I try to find ways to use those tools to also add some fun and just some good networking and discussion throughout the session. So try to find ways to use the tools, not just strictly related to the topic of the training session, but for icebreakers. And one example is I found a list of food that originated in Iowa. So I create a poll. And when people get back from breaks or back from lunch, if it's an all-day session, I may start with that and put that list up and have a poll. Let's check out the foods that you have eaten. And then have the people in class, raise hands or comment. And it was just such a fun, great discussion to sort of get everyone thinking again about working together and getting into the training again. So lots of different ways to use those tools to get information from people and get them engaged and get them involved. So.
Yeah, I love at the beginning of class, starting with a poll, really testing their engagement. And even for those folks that are online who maybe don't have their video on, it helps you kind of gauge whether they're really truly listening or not. So yeah, great tips there. So Helena, during the course of your class, how often would you say that you like to use one of these engagement techniques? You know, we kind of hear that term microbursts of learning. Yeah. So what's your best practice for how frequently to transition or use one of your tools?
Wow. I think for all of us trainers, we think about this from the moment we start our training design and development. And for me, it's just very top of mind about how do I engage the learners and when do I do that? And a recent study I saw that said adult learners have an attention span of about 5 to 10 minutes when they are listening to a presentation. So about every 5 minutes at the longest, I do some kind of a way to engage participants. And so I may not always use one of those tools every 5 minutes, but I do something. And one technique that I use a lot is I invite people to participate, which means I call on them. And I set that as a norm at the beginning of the session that I want to make sure we get to hear from everyone today. So I'm going to invite you to participate. Feel free to pass if you don't have a response. But I find that that is such a great technique to keep people engaged. And then I also will use that, but ask the learners to invite other learners to participate. So I may ask someone in the classroom to, now would you invite someone online to participate, and vice versa. So that way also it helps to connect the folks in the classroom with the folks online, and they are actually interacting with each other and doing that. But at least every 5 minutes, I'm doing something to engage the audience. And again, sort of just, maybe I use the tools at least, use one of the tools at least every 15 to 20 minutes, if not sooner. So.
That is great. I really like that concept of inviting the learner to participate. What a fun terminology, and then also a great way to kind of set the tone and the expectation for the class. So
it works. And
yeah.
Yes, it sets the expectation from the beginning that, and I will even say, I have some information to share with you, but there is such great expertise here in the room. So we want to learn from each other. So my job is to set the stage so you can also share information. And we want to hear from everyone. So.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Helena, for taking the time to share some of your best practices on teaching within a HyFlex classroom. We are so grateful to you for sharing your expertise with us today.
Great. Thank you, Barb.
Well, thank you for being here with us today, Lisa. We would love to talk a little bit about the HyFlex Classroom today. So a HyFlex Classroom is where you have half of your students that are live. The other half are joining virtually on Zoom or another platform simultaneously. And as you can understand, this brings some interesting dynamics to the classroom. And so we want to hear from Lisa. She is the queen of energy in a regular or a HyFlex classroom. And she is here today to share some of her tips and tricks on how to maintain that energy when you've got two different types of audiences at the same time. So Lisa, let's just start out. How do you prep differently for a HyFlex class?
Well, one of the things that I try to think about is I like to be very activity based and getting people into group discussions. And so if there's activities that I have to do, I try to ask myself, what can I do ahead of time to make sure that the activities are included for people that are remote. So for example, I do a Lego man exercise. So I make sure that, we send all of the things to the individuals who are virtually, so they have their own Lego kits. And so, making sure that you have that upfront work done ahead of time, and then being just very mindful on how do I want to set up my breakout rooms? When am I going to set them up? And what types of questions can generate conversation between the virtual group as well as the large group. So keeping it somewhat simple, but then also being very intentional of what do they need to have ahead of time so that they're going to be successful with that. So I'm always kind of trying to focus on what's going to work in this model, because some things I do face-to-face are not going to work in this model, so again, being intentional in that fashion.
Yeah, I love that, being mindful and intentional and prepared for both types of audiences. That's great. So Lisa, what do you do to maintain that energy in class? I know I've heard some instructors say, gosh, it's a little draining, when you're just looking at like the Brady Bunch screen on your computer, but then you've got those in the classroom that are kind of revving up your energy. So how do you maintain that energy for both audiences?
Well, I think I always tell people, if you love what you do, your energy comes naturally. And I'm the type of person that loves to really get people to think differently and to see things differently when they come to my trainings. But again, just trying to give people opportunities for engagement virtually. I get my energy off of the people as well. So if the audience is kind of like, I don't really want to do this, I might have to step it up and kind of get them involved. And it's fun when I have kind of a group with virtual and then also face-to-face. I make and send out these little paddles, or try to send paddles to my team virtually. So, if I just check in and say, how you guys all doing virtual, give me a quick thumbs up, woohoo. They have some of these kinesthetic things, and something about kinesthetic movement gives more energy to people as well. But man, if you love what you do, you love your topic, you really want to help people succeed, the energy just comes natural. So I wish I could give more tips on that, but again, it's really, your passion will speak for you. And when I'm able to, again, interact the two groups, I like to have the screen behind me with everybody on the Zoom where we can see kind of each other. That makes for a really good discussion and energy between the two groups as well. So asking them directly too, I try not to call people out too much, but I'll be like, hey, Jill, virtually, what do you think? What were something that you talked about in your session? So giving people a chance to give input.
That's great. And I love involving both audiences. And I do have to share, I have a set of those paddles here in my office, and we use those all the time. It is a lot of fun. So thank you for sharing that tip, Lisa. So how do you personally feel after a HyFlex class? Are you like pepped up? Or are you just like, oh, I'm exhausted?
A little bit of both. You get a little bit of an adrenaline rush because you're kind of like, okay, I'm feeling like Oz a little bit. I got to master these pieces. But, and then I'll be like, oh my gosh, I was exhausted. But it's again, you've got to get yourself in a mindset that no matter where people are at, there's still an audience. And so it's just really, it can be exhausting, but exhilarating at the same time. So you will feel a little bit of like, oh, thank God, I got through this. But then you'll be like, okay, what can I do better? And I'm always somebody who's like, okay, what could I have done 1% better? Or, and you learn as you go. Like, if you looked at one of these Zooms that I did at the very beginning, people are like, oh my gosh, that's so not you. I was nervous and I was like, oh gosh, the people are watching me, and you have a little bit of that, performance anxiety. But then just working on 1% better. What's something I could do a little bit differently here? Or, maybe I could make sure to put the full screen up so everybody can see the virtual participants who are, in the classroom. So just try to find one or two things that maybe went well, and one or two things that maybe you could just tweak and you know, I'm still not perfect at it. So I'm still trying to learn what can I do a little bit better here. So just, again, knowing your style that way, I think is important.
Yeah, that 1% better. That is awesome. I love that advice. All right. So finally, I have to comment on your background. You have such a fun background with your books, and yet you've got a live plant and that amazing artwork on the wall. How important is it to really kind of set the stage with your virtual background?
I think your virtual background tells a little bit about who you are and your style. And again, you want it to be somewhat pleasing. They always tell me the colors, you want something like a blue or an orange because it's soothing. Supposedly a blue type of background makes people feel more comfortable with you. So, and it's not cluttered. You know, I like it to be somewhat neat and organized for people so they're not distracted by a bunch of different things. And I like to kind of, you know, I love the beach. You know, I love to shine, as they so say. And, you know, if I can transport somebody into maybe a little bit of a vacation mode or a relaxed mode, that can help them learn a little bit more as well. Because if people are stressed out, they're not going to learn as well as you want them to. So just make it fun for people. And it can be a green screen where you can put a picture behind you. I go in and out with lights because I do a little bit of movement, as you can tell. So it's hard as a green screen for me to stay like 100% focused. So I like having just this natural background behind me. But I have a friend who's really good at this stuff. He came in and fixed it all up for me. So I can't take all the credit.
It's always good to have a friend.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing a little bit of the psychology behind the background as well. I really appreciate that. And for sharing your best practices with the HyFlex model.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And again, simple advice, just find one thing that works for you and keep trying to improve it and recognize when you do have some success.